In recent years, Mego have really stepped up their game, revisiting some of their old classics that they produced way back in the 1970s, and either re-releasing them or tweaking them with new sculpts and updates to the design and their costumes across multiple lines and ranges. And as I'm sure you're aware, Mego was one of the first companies to sort of bring together multiple universes in one consistent line and style. And one of their earliest attempts was mixing various Marvel and DC characters. But I'm pleased to say after many years they have finally returned to exploring some of their DC characters and tweaking them and broadening the range more so than they had previously. And whilst growing up, I wasn't really a DC fan. I've always had a strong love for Batman and Superman, but otherwise I wasn't really well versed in the DC universe until I became an adult and started to dip in a lot more across recent years. So it's really pleasing for me to be able to finally bulk out a collection of 8-inch scale action figures for these characters. So today I'm going to take a quick look at 4 of my favourite DC superheroes in the Mego line. So let's start off by taking a look at the superhero who started the entire superhero genre as we know it today, and that of course is Superman. I think the first thing to note about this line is that the packaging is very simplistic. This is of course essentially just a blue card with the Superman logo, and in the background we have a silhouette of Metropolis, which is kind of cool, but otherwise there's not an awful lot going on here, except of course we can see Superman on display in that window packaging, which is pretty cool. Whilst on the back we have an image of Superman, which is a nice cartoon image, but this of course is Superman in a more updated costume than the one we're actually getting in the packaging, and is a very much more modern interpretation of the character. But this is still quite colourful and quite fun, and I think overall it's fairly attractive packaging. And out of the packaging, the figure is nice and colourful. It's very bright, strong, vivid reds and blues and yellows, which is fantastic. Exactly what you'd want from Superman. You may notice that my Superman here is a little bit slumped over. He's leaning forward slightly. That's because this figure has great difficulty standing freely on his own, and we'll touch on that a little bit more later. I think the head sculpt here is actually really nicely done. Now, interestingly, I wouldn't say this is a sculpt that I would recognise instantaneously as Superman, apart from the little curl from the hair there, as he looks like he's been sculpted on someone who's slightly older. What's interesting about the sculpt to me is that there's definitely a sense of old Hollywood charm to it. Like, this is kind of a classical look. This could be Cary Grant, for example, or something like that. So I think this is actually a really good sculpt, even though it's not one I would immediately think of when I think of Superman. And of course, these things are open to artistic and creative license, but I think this is a really nice head sculpt, all things considered, and I think they've done a pretty good job of it. As I said, the costume is really bright and colourful. I really like that they've sewn in the design of the S on the chest there, so it looks really good. It does come with a separate belt, which is, again, is just a thin piece of fabric that wraps around him, but it's nice touch nevertheless, and I think they've done a pretty decent job of it all in all. And the cape nicely tucks into his shoulder line, which is pretty cool. It's not a big piece of fabric, so you can't wrap it around him or anything like that, but it still does the job. And on the back, I really like that they've got the yellow symbol there, which looks really cool. Maybe it's a little bit small, but it looks very vibrant and, you know, really captures Superman. It's a nice little detail, a little touch that they've added in, which I appreciate. Now, I did mention the boots previously, or I did say that he had difficulty standing freely, and that's because he has these rubber boots, and on the bottom of the boots there is a very slight heel, but also a rubber seam running down the centre of them, so it means his balance is always off, and it's very difficult. Unless you've got him slumped over, he's going to fall down, so you either need a support to help him stand up correctly, or you're going to need to sort of be very creative in bending him over so that he can stand on his own. He also comes with an accessory though, which is this clump of kryptonite, which I think is a really cool translucent piece. I think it's a nice little extra little accessory that they didn't need to give him, but I think it's really nice to have it. So I have to say, overall, they've done a pretty nice job of this Superman. I'm quite fond of it. I think it's very toyetic, it's very simple, of course it is, but I think nevertheless he's quite a fun figure to have in the collection. Next up, we have the Flash, and I've always really liked the colour scheme of the Flash's outfit, and this is a classic Flash appearance, so I really like this costume in particular. This design is really, really nice. Again, the card packaging is very, very simple. It just has the Flash logo on it, and of course a red background. Again, we can see a silhouette of a city in the background there, so overall this is still pretty nice, although very, very simple. Meanwhile, on the reverse, they've kept the style consistent as they had with Superman by having, again, the logo and a very simplistic backdrop with a central comic book image of the character. Although in this case, again, I don't feel it really works because it is a very modern interpretation, which doesn't marry up with the figure that we're actually getting in hand. Obviously, there's lots of little extra details on this Flash, and I think it's more noticeable than it is with the Superman, because the Superman, the changes are very subtle. It's around the belt and things like that, whereas here, it's obviously a different design. But once again, out of the packaging, this is a very bright, vibrant, colourful character, which works really well. And you notice this character has a lot more ability to stand freely on his own. He's not stooped or slumped over, which is a really good sign. The head sculpt this time around, I'm not as keen on. There's a little bit of bleed, you'll notice, between the mask and the face. It looks obviously a different colour to the costume, so it's quite noticeable. The sculpt itself is absolutely fine, but it's very straightforward, very basic. But it is a little bit incongruous, but it's not a disaster by any stretch of the imagination. It's fine. One of the nice details I do like about it, however, is the lightning bolt on the side of the ears. I think they've done a good job of this. This is nice and bright and yellow, and I think they've done a really good job of it in terms of the sculpt, and it looks pretty fun. You'll notice this time around the Flash emblem and the Flash icons around the waist and the cuffs there are actually all transfers that have been stuck on rather than being woven into the fabric like Superman's. Still, this looks very, very good. This looks very presentable, but you might want to be wary of these transfers because I suspect they might wear and flake off over time. They've given him rubber boots again, but this time it works a lot better. There's no unsightly seam that runs along the bottom, forcing his balance off. It's quite flat, and so he can stand freely on his own very, very easily, and there's no problems here. So this is really, really solid. Moving on to Batman, who's one of my personal favourite superheroes of all time, we can see the same logic has been applied to the card artwork. It's very, very simplistic. It is just a greyed out skyline and the Batman symbol, with of course the clamshell packaging showing the figure himself on display. So the design is quite basic and it's quite dull, particularly in the Batman's case because obviously it's greys and blacks, which is not the most exciting or most attractive colours in the world. And again, on the reverse of the packaging, we have a very large image of Batman in action, which is a nice illustrated image here, which is pretty cool. Again, same problem in that it's the wrong version of the character versus the one that we're getting in the box. Obviously, this is a very modern interpretation of the character, particularly the telltale sign being that gold trim around the bat symbol. But it's a minor gripe. Otherwise, it's very nicely done, and it's quite presentable. This is displayable this side of the packaging, certainly. Out of the box, you'll notice I have a rather slumped Batman here. Again, he's got the exact same problem as Superman in that those rubber boots, have that seam that kind of force him off balance really, so you have to be very careful how you pose him. But I think the head sculpt is really very cool. I think they've done a nice job of this. This is definitely Batman, good expression on the face there. Again, very simple design, but well rendered. The bat symbol this time around is sewn into the costume as part of the design of the costume, which is very cool. And you'll notice he's got some lovely little extra details here as well, such as the plastic utility belt, which is kind of cool. It's nice to have an extra texture in there rather than being a thin band of material like Superman had. This is a physical plastic piece, which is very cool. And he's also got the fins on the gauntlet as well, which is very nice. Sadly though, as I noted previously, he is lumbered with those rubber boots, which, in terms of the design is great, but they're a little bit impractical, and I wish they'd given him more the Flash boots. Would have been a lot better, as these ones just tend to be one solid rubber piece, which with the seam down the middle of the sole, and it just, like I said, it makes it very difficult to balance these figures. I really like his cape though. I like how they've cut the design into the bottom of it so it looks like bat wings, which is very cool. And it is very posable. Obviously you can flip it around. There's a couple of different looks you can go with, and as I said, I really like those fins on the gauntlet. It's a nice little extra touch and it's very effective. He also comes with an accessory, which is, of course, his Batarang. It's a very simplistic semicircle, which actually looks more like it's out of the Dark Knight Returns than anything else. But this is a very cool accessory, and he holds it very, very well. And overall, I have to say, I think the Batman's probably my favourite. That was probably always going to be the case because I love the character so much. But I think they've done a really nice job of this figure, and I'm really very fond of him. And then finally today we have Robin. Again, very, very simple card art. We know what to expect by this point. It is just the Robin symbol there, and the very simple basic back down with the figure on display in the window. Meanwhile, on the reverse, we have a very modern interpretation of the Robin costume. And I have to say, of all the examples we've seen today, this is the most egregious because it's actually a different Robin. So this is the Tim Drake costume, whereas the figure we have in hand, of course, is the classic Dick Grayson or possibly Jason Todd costume. So yeah, this really doesn't work in terms of the packaging, and it's a little bit frustrating. But I have to say, of all the figures, the Robin is the most colourful and most visually dynamic. I have to say, like, it just jumps out of you as soon as you've got it out of the packaging. He really jumps out in the collection when he's on display. And yes, the head sculpt, yeah, pretty much spot on, to be honest. No complaints here. It's a simple look, but it's definitely ripped from the comic books, and I think this perfectly does justice to the character. Yeah, very successful. And of all the figures, he's probably got the most going on in terms of tailoring and colours and different elements to his costume. So we can see here, obviously, he's got the transfer for the Robin symbol, but he's also got like the buttons going across down his tunic there. He's got the plastic belt which goes around his waist, and of course all the different various elements that make him up. Just works really well together and makes this a very colourful, very visually interesting and arresting toy. And mercifully, he's also not cursed with those boots either. So he does have some rubber sort of platform shoes, but these work really very well. There's no problems with his balance here. He stands freely, very, very easily on his own, and this is very effective. So top marks for this. His yellow cloth cape is quite short. It is tied neatly around his neck there, so there's no danger of it coming loose. It's fairly malleable, of course, so you can flop it about, but there's not too much you can do with it, really. Sadly, Robin doesn't come with any accessories, although you don't really expect that of a Mego figure anyway. But overall, I think he's a real surprising winner in this set. He's not a character that I'm massively overly fond of, but I have to say, in figure form, this is a fantastic addition to the line, and he may just out Batman for being my favourite in this line. So there you have it. There's my overview of 4 of my favourite DC Mego figures. I'm really fond of all of these. Like I said, there's some issues there when it comes to the boots, particularly on the Superman and the Batman, which is a shame in terms of their standing freely. But otherwise, this is a really nice set, a very fun toyetic set. They've done a handful of others in this line as well in terms of superheroes. We've done a Wonder Woman, which I have to say, from my own personal preference, doesn't look great from the photos I've seen. But nevertheless, that is another one we can add to the lineup, and I'm sure there'll be many others to come as well. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.